Hello, my name's Julian Edgar and I'm the author of the book Modifying the Electronics of Modern Classics. It's for people who own cars from the 1990s and that next decade. What I want to do today is show you a simple, cheap, easy technique that will allow you to advance the ignition timing a little bit. Now, of course, in a lot of these cars, there's no way of doing that normally. You can't turn the distributor, there's no points or weights or anything like that, so you seem to be stuck. But with the approach I'm going to describe, you can add a little bit of timing. How much timing? Say 3, 4, 5 degrees, somewhere in that sort of range. Now, why would you want to do so? Well, if you're running higher octane fuel than standard, you can run slightly more ignition advance. That's likely to give you better responsiveness and a little bit better power. Now, the approach I'm going to describe has often got a bad reputation. Bad reputation? Why? Well, it's because people make stupid claims. They say things like 10% more power and 15% better fuel economy. And both of those are just ludicrous. But does it give you a little advantage? Yes, it does. And because it costs so little and it's so easy to do, it's certainly worthwhile trialling. Remember though, you need to be running higher octane fuel. Without running higher octane fuel, advancing the timing can cause detonation. So, what's all this about? Well, up here I've got the ECU, the electronic control unit, going to a resistor that then goes to ground. Now, that resistor is the intake air temperature sensor. An intake air temperature sensor is simply a resistor that changes in resistance depending on the temperature it's subjected to. And the interesting thing about intake air temperature sensors, and coolant temperature sensors too for that matter, is they go up in resistance as intake air temperature goes down. Right. Now, why is the IAT, the intake air temperature sensor, even relevant? Well, the ECU makes decisions on what timing to run depending on a bunch of factors. One of those is engine speed, engine RPM. One of those is engine load. But another one is the temperature of the intake air. As the intake air temperature goes up, the timing gets pulled back because detonation is more likely. Now, if we can make the ECU think that the intake air temperature is cooler than it really is, it will advance the timing. How do we do that? How do we make the ECU think that the intake air temperature is cooler than it really is? Well, all we have to do is to add a series resistor. A series resistor? Let's have a look. We break that wire and we put a resistor in. Now, that resistor gets added to the resistance that's already been posed by the IAT, the intake air temperature sensor. The ECU thinks the temperature is colder than it is because the resistance is higher, and so it advances the timing a bit. Easy, very easy. But let's make it a bit more practical as to how you would really do it. Now, what we would typically use, instead of just a resistor, is we would use a pot, a potentiometer, but we use only 2 of its connections. See how that connection there doesn't go to anything. So we're using the pot as a variable resistor. We connect to the middle terminal and to one end terminal only. As we turn the knob, the amount of resistance varies. Now, you're saying to yourself, okay, that's good, because that means I can actually trial different amounts of ignition advance based on where I put that particular knob. And that's absolutely true. What sort of value should that pot be, that variable resistor? Well, measure the resistance of the sensor when it's unplugged from the rest of the circuit, measure it at normal ambient temperature, and then get a variable resistor which is about that same value. 2000 ohms, 2 kilo ohms, 2 kilo ohms, 2K is a common one, but it might even be higher than that. You can buy pots in all sorts of different values and they're so cheap you could probably buy a number of different ones. Now, be careful. When you change that pot, you will be changing the ignition advance. If you hear detonation, a tink, 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 tink from the engine, that is not good. You do not want to hear that. And that means you've advanced the timing too far and you need to pull it back. Most often, you won't be able to advance it to the point of detonation, especially if you're running high octane fuel, but always be really careful when you're actually testing. So you run a little bit more ignition timing advance by telling the ECU that the temperature of the intake air is cooler than it really is. You can then just leave the pot in that position once you've decided on what the optimal advance is, or you can measure the actual value and then just replace it with a fixed resistor. Either way, you'll still achieve that same outcome. Now, as I said, it's not going to turn your car into a fire-breathing monster. It's not meant to. But certainly in a car in which I've actually done this, a manual transmission car, I felt I could change up a little bit earlier. It had better part throttle torque. It would hold top gear at smaller throttle angles. You could certainly feel the difference. And of course, remember that was running higher octane fuel as well. So it's able to take advantage then of that higher octane fuel. Resistor in series with the intake air temperature sensor, very cheap, very easy, and if you make it a variable resistor, you can even adjust the advance that you get. The book's called Modifying the Electronics of Modern Classics, and I highly recommend it to you. Thank you.